To our DISES Showcase session. I'm Mary Keeley and I'm the president of DISES this year. And as we begin, I'd like to familiarize you with our mission to frame our presentation today. Our mission in DISES is to promote knowledge exchange, collaboration, human rights, and advocacy for individuals with disabilities. And to further that mission, we're offering this session to acquaint you with some of the work that our DISES members are doing to promote inclusive education for students with disabilities in several countries. This presentation will focus on lessons learned from the implementation of inclusive education projects in several different countries. Our DISES panel members will highlight their global experiences promoting inclusive practices through their work with students, educators, and other professionals, while building collaborative partnerships and supporting sustainable changes. As a result of this session, you as participants will increase your knowledge of cultural norms for educating students with disabilities in several countries and gain a global perspective of the challenges and solutions experienced in implementing inclusive practices. You'll also learn strategies for providing professional learning opportunities to educators on inclusive practices and learn about community engagement, strategies and activities, and interprofessional learning between university students and partners in other countries. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel members who will be sharing their experiences with you in work they've done in other countries. Dr. Clara Houth from Marymount University is also the vice president of DISES and will be sharing information about Panama. Dr. Rebecca Jez from the University of San Diego, California, will be sharing some experiences from South Africa, and Rebecca is also a member at large for communications for DISES this year. Dr. Deborah Tamaclo from Millersville University in Pennsylvania, also a member at large, DISES this year for international outreach, will be sharing experiences she's had in Ghana. And Dr. Anya Evmenova from George Mason University will be sharing her experiences from work she's done in Pakistan. So now each of our panel members will share some of their experiences with you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary, so much for the introductions. And I'm excited to be here today on a panel with these fabulous educators. And I'm here just to share a little bit about some projects that I've been working on with a group of educators in Panama and with students here in the US as well, pre-service teachers. So one of the interesting things about Panama is they are an emerging nation as far as integrating and inclusive practices and with students with disabilities in classrooms. It tends to happen more with the private schools than the public schools, but they're working on it, and that's part of one of their goals is to make sure that all teachers are trained in some type of work with children with disabilities. They have a ways to go, but they're very excited to be part of that. So I'm going to share a little bit about a community engagement grant that I was able to work with Marymount University in building a course with pre-service teachers here in the United States who would be collaborating with teachers in Panama and then have an exchange in Panama itself where we would share lessons and ideas and be able to collaborate back and forth on strategies and interventions for children with disabilities. So we met here in the US and built this class, and we're able to do some of this online depending on technology. The availability wasn't always that strong in Panama, but we're able to do some of the introductions and information and those aha moments where my students and the teachers in Panama realized that there were a lot more things we had in common in educating children with disabilities. So a little bit about the school in Panama. It is a private school. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2019 and 2020 and those activities that engaged both countries in building this collaborative network. In 2019, we were able to go to the school in Panama and work with the community there in Virunga and build a repertoire together, some of the conversations around inclusive practices at their school. And our teachers were able to learn quite a bit more about the culture, the community, and the importance of family in Panama, and how the view of disability is a little different in that oftentimes families are dealing with working with the children on their own. So communities do come together, and that was really good for our teachers to see, because sometimes we differentiate too much on school, home, community, and we kind of put them into little silos. And so that was an excellent cultural exchange and discussion with the Panamanian school and teachers. So what my students were able to do is we were able to bring some of the intervention strategies that the teachers in Panama had asked us to bring, and they were literacy based. They wanted English language lessons, and they wanted to know a little bit more about assessing literacy and working with struggling learners. So my students were able to do the DIBELS test, some literacy assessments. They did some literacy lessons. And I should also mention in some of the pictures here, several of my students are from other countries as well. So it really was a connection, a collaboration across multiple continents meeting up in Panama. And several of my students also had disabilities such as hearing impairment and visual impairment. So that was a conversation with the teachers there. They didn't realize that teachers could become teachers if they were hard of hearing. So that was an excellent outcome as well. And of course, we had a lot of cultural exchanges with our students and our teachers, and both in the school and in the communities in Panama, so that everyone was able to engage in those conversations. So some of the outcomes from the community engagement grant in 2019, again, we were able to go to Panama, participate with one another. And then in 2020, due to COVID and the crisis involved, we were not able to go, but our teachers did build a virtual library. We shared back and forth some of the virtual challenges in teaching. Panama shut down completely during COVID with teaching, and opened up a little bit later. But when they did, they were really anxious to share what they were doing, what we were doing, what worked, what didn't work. Excuse me. So one of the outcomes also is that those teachers from Panama will be coming to the US for a week-long engagement here with Marymount students in the summer of 2022 because of the COVID epidemic. But we were also able to leave them with how to support their students with student information files on assessments. We shared via a website. The students built a website to share with the teachers in Panama, and then they could exchange information back and forth via Google. So it was a really excellent learning experience for everyone, not just the 2019, but also the 2020 events, when we realized that everyone was in the same boat and we were all trying to do our very best in educating children with special needs.
There's always one. All right. Hi, my name is Rebecca Jez, and I am an assistant professor at University of San Diego. And one of the blessings about working at the University of San Diego is that we have a global department that allows us to create courses around the world. And I had done my Fulbright in South Africa in 2013, and using those contacts, I was able to build a course that has run twice and is planning a third time in 2022, January 2022, where I bring students who are in the School for Educational Sciences together with educators from South Africa in creating what is called a change-making project. And so one of the first steps to doing that is really learning about the country context. So we learn about the educational policy, such as White Paper number 6, which looks at inclusive practices and creating a more inclusive educational system. We look at language policies. We look at community engagement policies, which the community engagement policy really matches up how the universities can work with schools in the community to share knowledge and experience and training. We also look at the educational context. And one of the things that South Africa did was decide that they would go full inclusion. Some of the areas of growth include training all of the teachers in the schools on inclusive practices. And when I say inclusive, I mean inclusive around differing abilities, around language. There's 11 official languages in South Africa, so that is a big one. And then also around trauma-informed practices and addressing different socioeconomic needs. There is also a need to support policies. So they have different policies around how to support the students, but then a lot of times the teachers haven't been trained or provided with enough support to complete the documents that support these different policies. Another interesting challenge is around the unions. The unions are very strong in the government schools, and one of the things, because there's a lot of need in the government schools, so one of the things that the teaching unions have said is teach to your contract. And so those additional trainings in the afternoons or the weekends or during the summer are not necessarily encouraged. And we knew that we would be getting to the country in a time that was outside school hours. And so, the educators who signed up and agreed to do this did it for, as they put it, their own learning, and so that they could really grow and collaborate with other educators from around the world. And then finally, the societal supports. There is a lot of family engagement and community engagement in the different communities that we were going to. And so really harnessing that type of energy and interest. So we had many of the teachers who also worked within their churches. And we have the university that was also going in and working with non-government organizations. I'd also like to point out in this picture that I have here on the slide, this is actually the year that we went there in 2018 when DISES was having their conference in South Africa. And so we did a collaborative change-making project with Clara and her students from Marymount University. And so we had 10 students from my university, 10 students from her university, and around 50 South African educators that all came together for a few months beforehand. We did about 5 or 6 email exchanges, and then to get to know each other and learn the context and learn about each other's country and education system. And then when we got on the ground, we met at the Apartheid Museum and talked about the different experiences with apartheid and the civil rights movement. And then we had a day where we went into the school and worked with teachers on kind of planning an event, followed by a change-making symposium where each group presented out on some inclusive practices that they had developed and were planned to use in their classrooms. Here is how we engage. So the top picture is our 2018 Change-Making Symposium. The bottom picture is actually a day that we had at another school in 2019. That was my part of my group that went. And we spent the day where we did literacy support. We did some work with a culturally responsive student transition portfolio. And we followed that with a planning session with educators from Johannesburg and Soweto and the CBD. We had educators from Pretoria, in Atteridgeville, that's where this school, the bottom picture was taken, in Limpopo and Polokwane, and then also in Cape Town, in Athlone, Guguletu and Khayelitsha. We have schools that we worked with. And one of the big intentions for the work that we did is really collaborating not only with university faculty. So we worked with university faculty from the University of Johannesburg, University of Witwatersrand, Cape Peninsula University of Technology. But we also worked with university students. So we had master's level students who came, and they also participated in this work with the schools and also with the Change-Making Symposium. And then finally, as I mentioned, the educators from R to 12 schools. R is the equivalent of kindergarten, so similar to kindergarten through 12th grade schools. So anyway, and the culminating project being the Change Makers Project. Once you became a change maker in these with these symposiums, you are for life. And so the same these same two groups will be invited to our next Changemaker event in 2022. This model has also been used in Jamaica and Tanzania and Malawi. And so we are continuing to kind of grow this same idea of the collaboration between countries, between educators, and sharing ideas and practices.
Hi, my name is Deborah-Ghana. I'm an associate professor at Millersville University, and I'm going to talk about Ghana. So Ghana, just to provide you some context, is a country in West Africa with a population of 30 million. But we are in our early infancy stages of inclusive education, just because of the deep-rooted cultural norms that create barriers for the implementation of inclusive education. So just to share some of these cultural norms with you, in Ghana, we believe that disabilities are caused by the gods or by curses. So when people have disabilities, they are very much stigmatized against. And because of that, families actually hide their children in their rooms. They don't normally educate these children. And also teachers also feel that somehow they are going to be infected with some of these disabilities, just because in most of our schools, we do not have much training for special education. So the government passed a legislation about inclusive education, but we still have these deep-rooted cultural norms just because they govern everything that we do. So for example, chieftaincy is big in Ghana, and you are considered not complete if you have a disability. So you cannot be a chief, for example. And it's a prestigious institution that people want to be in. So that adds to this stigma. Also, when you are going to get married, unfortunately, they send people to your house or your family to investigate if there is someone with a disability or a child with a disability from that offspring. So it's very difficult on the part of families, it's difficult on the part of teachers, it's difficult even on the part of government, because it's just, these are just our beliefs. So there was a ratification of education for all to include all students in the classroom. So because of that, teachers are now being trained by non-governmental organizations to organize, to rally behind this inclusive education, Also, the stakeholders also struggle to implement this just because someone can travel. For example, services provided for children with disabilities who are segregated. So just to give context to what is going on right now, at least we have children who are being educated, but in segregated classroom. And even with the ones that are educated in these segregated classrooms, they find it difficult to even travel to get services. So I'm going to share some work that I did with my students in Ghana. For example, I teach special education and reflective practices. So in my reflective practice class, I talk about some of these cultural norms. I talk about the lack of teacher support. I talk about the lack of services that we have in Ghana. So 3 of my students were really interested in going to see what it is like. So they did a campaign for one student, one assistive technology, and we got a lot of staff that we brought with us to Ghana, me and my 3 students, and we were not able to have access to the students, so that is why I don't have pictures, but the teachers met with us, talked about the students, talked about some of the cultural norms, and then we were able to give these assistive technologies to them. However, one thing that Ghana, we don't do is we are not able to tell if people have invisible disabilities because we do not have the screening tools. So in the inclusive classroom, like the regular classroom, you will find out that there are students who are struggling, but they are just spanked because they don't know what to do. So because of that, we went into some of the regular education classrooms and helped students who were struggling. And we just did some kind of professional development for the teachers on total participation techniques, how to involve all the students in the classroom, irrespective of their levels of how they take in information. So that was very, very helpful. And the teachers appreciated that, and they invited us back to come and have this professional development for them. So this time around, the second time, which was in 2019, I went with some of my colleagues who also provided some of these professional development for the teachers.
Wonderful. So we're changing continents, but we're really not changing what we will be talking about, because it sounds like most of us are experiencing very similar things, regardless of where we are in the world. So I am Anya Evmenova. I'm associate professor at George Mason University, and one of my international special education experiences has been with Punjab Inclusive Education Projects. And that is an inclusive educational initiative in rural Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a fascinating country. It has 70 different languages. It has 10 different religions. It's just a super interesting place. Pakistan has committed to all major international laws on education for students with disabilities, and they are trying their best. And just like you've heard before, there are challenges. Now, individuals with disabilities make up to about 2.5% of total population in Pakistan, and of those individuals with disabilities, about 33% are in the K-12 age range. But only 4% of students with disabilities have access to schooling. So almost 96% of students with disabilities do not get any education. Now, when I say that they have access to schooling, that actually includes both inclusive and separate schools, because traditionally, in Pakistan, there have been separate schools or special schools for 4 different groups of students. Those were students with physical disabilities, students with intellectual and cognitive disabilities, students with visual impairments or blindness, and students with hearing impairments and blindness. And just like what Deborah was saying about Ghana, those invisible disabilities are usually hard to identify as well as to address in the classrooms. So Punjab Inclusive Project was this pilot initiative in 2 rural Pakistani school districts. And it focused on 2 things, on first identifying, but also on mainstreaming students specifically with what they call mild disabilities or those more invisible disabilities in regular schools. Now, along with my Pakistani colleagues, we have conducted research in effort to understand what are some specific challenges and solutions that teachers experienced in those rural Pakistani schools. We conducted 20 interviews with 20 teachers, which allowed us to develop a questionnaire. And then that questionnaire was distributed to 700 teachers. And the themes that emerged from the interviews and from the follow-up questionnaires, they really focused on those major challenges that you see on your screen. While all the teachers participating in this particular initiative received some sort of training on students with disabilities, it seemed to focus more on the awareness about different disability types and student characteristics, which was great, a great first step. But all the teachers expressed, the vast majority of teachers, I should say, expressed the feeling of being unprepared to how to actually support students with disabilities in their regular classrooms, which becomes a major problem if you look at the average class size that was reported through our survey data. So the average was 40 students and the maximum was 63. If you have 63 students in your class and you are given a few students with disabilities and you don't really know how to teach those students, that can become a problem. And unfortunately, bad experiences sometimes result in bad attitudes. So teachers really are being proactive there. They're trying to seek those in-service professional development opportunities, which we were able to provide. But they actually don't stop there. And my Pakistani colleagues are working right now on changing the in-service, the teacher education programs to incorporate some of that preparation for general education teachers. They started with elementary grades, but they hope to continue that development. And I commend them for that. I think it's a wonderful idea, and I do hope that it will result in more pro-inclusive attitudes as well as in more success stories.
Hey, thank you, Anya, and thank you all of our esteemed panelists. It was wonderful hearing about your experiences and your direct work in those countries. We're going to summarize by asking our panelists about lessons learned as a result of these experiences. I'm going to start with Deborah. Deborah, what's the most valuable lesson you learned about cultural norms for educating students with disabilities?
I would say that it's very humbling, just because coming to the United States and looking at all the services that children with disabilities have and the training that teachers have without barriers, it is, I would say, that very painful to realize that cultural norms are actually creating barriers for inclusive education, and also the number of languages that we speak. If students have a mild disability, it's very difficult to tell. sometimes you do not know if it's a language barrier or actually a disability, because we have 33 different ethnic languages in Ghana, and it's so difficult to actually implement inclusion in the regular classroom. Also, with the cultural norms that is preventing us, one lesson that I am learning is that because of that, the cultural norms, it's even difficult for people that are in power to help teachers. So teachers are in such a difficult situation that they are not well paid, they are not well trained, sufficiently trained to provide services, but they are expected to do their work. So it's just difficult for everyone that there is nothing going on. But with a little that we can also do in terms of training teachers to implement total participation techniques where they can include all students in the classroom, I think is just a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Deborah. Anya, you spoke about challenges and solutions for implementing inclusive practices. Tell us about the most valuable lesson you learned in that area.
Sure. Yeah. And I agree with Deborah because that it's a very interesting experience. And, I talked about experiences in Pakistan and teachers not feeling prepared to teach students with disabilities. And I couldn't stop but think that that is not very different in the US. We are a little bit ahead, and general education teachers do receive some preparation, but they do not have as many courses as we probably wished they did. And also, I find that every time when I talk to those teachers during the PD about students with disabilities, I can see sort of, some resentment or some being worried that it's a lot and I'm not sure I'll be able to do it. But approaching it from a UDL perspective, from Universal Design for Learning perspective, when you really showcase how some of these strategies can help all your learners, not only those with disabilities, really breaks the ice. And that's when teachers really become super excited about it.
Thank you. Rebecca, tell us the most valuable lesson you learned about strategies for providing professional learning opportunities on inclusive practices in South Africa.
Well, as I was listening to my colleagues talk, the large class sizes are very apparent also in the government schools in South Africa, as is the desire to have more training, have more support, have more resources, but then the lack of time and also support to sometimes move these different ideas to fruition. And so I think, one of the things that I have really learned is around making sure that we're building on strengths and that we're identifying the things that are working and trying to increase those and trying to work collaboratively to identify ways that we can make these things happen. And so, I mentioned the collaboration with the non-government organization. I also collaborate with a hub at the university at WITS, where they are looking at language and literacy supports. And so I think one of the big things is that we can't do this alone. The other piece is that when I go into these countries, I do my best to work with my students on being cognizant of the frame of mind that they're coming in with, that they're not deficit based, that they are not coming in with savior mentality, but that we're going in to learn from each other. And I think that that's a really important piece, especially coming from the US and going into other countries. And so that would be my major lessons learned.
Thank you, Rebecca. And building on that, Clara, anything that you might want to add about community engagement between university students and your global partners or our global partners as a lesson learned from your experience?
Well, I'd also like to thank my colleagues for bringing up so many of the topics that are impacting countries, schools, and children around the world. And echoing a little bit on Rebecca as well, working with university students and making sure that we're thinking about the lens in which we are coming from and embracing the communities that we're working with, and also seeing it as a collaboration. And that's one of the things that's so important with the communities and engaging. The recognition when working with the community teachers and those aha moments are amazing, because what we realize that we're so much more alike than we are different. We have a lot of the same challenges, much to which have been mentioned here, and the time, and then but the passion is there. So going back to that strength area, teachers around the world want to teach. They want to include children. They don't always have the tools or the how to do this. And that's where these collaborative engagements, the community engagement as well, really comes into play, where we can work not just with schools and teachers, but with entire communities on awareness of ability and teaching to strength, and then sharing of resources. And I think that's one of the other things that was mentioned. That's one of the things that we were building on in the COVID crisis with international teachers. They're asking us to share culturally responsive teaching practices. They want to know more about some of the things we're doing here. And then in the same token, my teachers here, I'm building a virtual class this semester with schools, 3 schools in Colombia and the school in Panama, so that everyone can be part of the conversation, even though it's virtual, but we can at least share and engage. And the hope is that we continue to build through our efforts, our colleagues and our universities and our school districts and our countries, in making sure that all children are learning and in school and part of all communities.
Thank you. Thank you for your great expertise and sharing those experiences directly. And the theme of collaboration really ran through all of your shared experiences, and our hopes that all society, all students will learn and be productive and successful citizens in whatever country they live in, with whatever supports we can provide. And I think our panel has been able to share that very well, very effectively in terms of their direct experiences. So thank you again for the wonderful presentations and the time that you spent sharing with us and giving us your global perspectives. So we will want to share with you some other kinds of information through the events that we're going to have at CEC Live and beyond. So I'd like to mention a few of those to you. If you're not already a member of DISES, please join. Visit us at our website that's indicated there, and you can get information about joining DISES, or go onto the CEC website and you'll get that same information about membership and then joining DISES as the international division. We have a few events that are at CEC Live. Today, the same day, Friday, March 12th, we have our membership and business meeting, followed by our reception and award presentation. We have a special award we'll be giving at the reception for an individual who's made a significant contribution during the pandemic this year. We're very excited about that. It's one of a kind. It's our first. Hopefully it's our last for the pandemic, but we plan to do that this evening, 6:30 to 7:30. And then also plan to join us for some of our upcoming events. We're very excited to announce that we will have our DISES International Conference next year in Dubai, June 2022. Please be looking at our website for details on that in terms of the dates and the hotels and some of the activities that we're sponsoring. We'll have another call for proposals soon. We're expanding on that. We also have conducted or beginning to conduct a virtual event series this year in lieu of a conference. And so our second event will be on June 26th and then our third on October 23rd. Our first one held on February 27th, and that will be something that will be made available to those who were not able to participate. So we hope to see you all there at some or all of these events and chat with us anytime. We have our email addresses and information to share with you on a slide. And so if you have any questions or comments, or want to be in touch with us about further information about DISES, about any of these countries that you heard about today and the experiences our esteemed presenters shared with you, please don't hesitate to contact us. We really appreciate your participation, your attention, and really are very, very pleased that you joined us today. We hope to see you soon and look forward to having you participate in future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.